So round 6, Chicago Open, just lost this very difficult game to Jeffrey, which was the night before. But yeah, real bummer, especially after the game. I stayed up a bit, just like thinking about like some of the key end game positions and actually realizing like I had blown a very simple draw multiple times, but especially towards the end. And yeah, that was a real bummer because you always get a case of the what ifs. What could have been different. At the same time, playing like a really hard fought game is kind of useful in and of itself, right? Even if the result doesn't go your way. So I do try to just kind of like focus on the positive as best I can. Although it always hurts, it always kind of smarts. But I think you just have to focus on the good and realize like if you're getting opportunities, you'll keep getting opportunities, and hopefully over time you get better at exploiting those chances. But the fact that you are getting chances is a good thing in and of itself. Um, and yeah, 4 more rounds to go. Of course, the tournament was far from spoiled for me, so I wanted to kind of keep performing well. And I definitely was really worried about this game because, yeah, it hurt so much. Losing as white. Now next game you're playing black against Grandmaster. So this game I'm paired against Grandmaster Alexei Sorokin, who I think is a fairly young guy. And yeah, I was really worried that I was just going to lose a second game in a row because I don't know if I like necessarily felt tilted, but I felt like it would be very easy for me to be tilted going into this game. Anyway, he goes for the King's Indian, and I believe he actually plays pretty much exclusively the Bayonet Attack, which he ends up using in this game as well. And yeah, very famous line. I mean, I remember when I was like first starting out as a D4 player, I was like 18 or 1900. I was like looking up some theory, and back then the Bayonet Attack was all the rage. I was studying the games of like Kramnik and Van Whaley, and yeah, it seemed like it was just crushing for white. But then it went out of fashion, and now I think it's kind of coming back a little bit. But I was prepared for this one, so I went with A5. I think this is one of the main ways of dealing with this nowadays. Takes, rook takes. White played A4. I went 88. There's different setups here for black, but this one just kind of makes sense to me. And here he played bishop E3, which is actually kind of a rare move. This one definitely took me by surprise. Usually what white does is they play something like knight d2, knight to b3. They chase the rook away, and then they play for like c5 and a5. And well, in the meantime, black is eventually playing for f5. So I think I would play like rook a8 here. And yeah, then play for f5, maybe c5 somewhere. And yeah, overall it's like, well, it's a King's Indian, so it's a pretty sharp position. Although I would say these tend to be a little bit more positional. And the other, I think, big plan for white is to go bishop a3, bishop b4. So here I think I would go b6, and we get something like this. And then again, black is looking for c5, black is looking for f5, and okay, very sharp position. So bishop e3, and yeah, this one was very worrying because basically I have two moves here. I have f5, which I ended up playing, and I could also consider b6. So f5 I was a little bit worried about, like knight g5, but eventually I decided that it seems so bad after, let's say, h6, knight e6, takes, and c6. And I thought this is okay for me. If rook b1 or something, I'm going queen c8 and just trying to take this one. Wasn't totally sure, but felt like this is okay for black. And if c5, I think I can usually go d5. And so the other option was, so that was kind of the drawback, because I really wasn't sure about this position, because you never like allowing this knight to e6 stuff, though sometimes you just have to kind of accept it. The other option would be to play b6, but then white kind of gets their dream setup in with knight d2, f5, f3, and then we could play for some kind of position like this, but it's actually very worried that I would just be behind, like rook a8, a5, and yeah, we're not really ready to push g4 yet. White's already breaking through. If b takes a5, c5. So yeah, I don't know. It seemed like white's just lighting up the queen side, and felt like black was behind. So I ended up playing f5. I just figured I'd rather play into this position. And then he goes c5, which, yeah, I just did not realize was even an option. But I guess it is. Actually, after the game, I looked it up. This was played in some high level game. I think it was like Gelfand against Gawain Jones or something like that. Some very strong players. And kind of a crazy move, because at first glance it looks like f4 and black is just winning this pawn on the spot. But okay, it felt like the rook was going to be a little bit funny. Maybe white goes like a5 or something, knight a4. And yeah, I wasn't sure if the rook is gonna make it out alive. Also, I should note my opponent played this really fast. Like, he played bishop e3 relatively quickly. Maybe he spent like 1 or 2 minutes. Like, he was kind of just choosing a move, because he's had this position before many times. So of course he has something prepped. And then after f5, he played c5 like really quite fast. So yeah, it was also possible to go here in dc, but then it just feels like, yeah, the position's opening up. White goes maybe knight b5, rook c1, and this looks very scary. Maybe this is playable for black, but over the board, of course, it looked like it could be just a total disaster. So after some thought, I ended up playing f takes e4, which I think is a reasonable move. So he takes back, I play knight f5, and my idea is just to play knight f6, and just fight for the central squares, and just kind of play a more open position. So we've given up the e4 square, but at the same time we've also created some squares for our own pieces, and in general I feel like these structures are actually pretty playable for black, even though optically they might look a little bit worse. But black has play with like knight f6. The rook is kind of extracting these pawns, and it's not so easy for white to maintain the grip. So he goes bishop d2 here, and I think the engine was giving white some advantage with like bishop g5. I would play knight f6, and then like this move, bishop b5, which can't say I really considered during the game. Because he ends up playing, I would say, more naturally, like bishop d2. I draw back, rook a8, rook c1, knight f6. And actually felt like I was able to equalize pretty comfortably here. He takes on f6, bishop takes, cd6, cd6, bishop d3. Then I play bishop d7. And yeah, it doesn't feel like black is really all that worse. Like, I have kind of a strong pawn on e5. We both have like weaknesses on the queen side. And yeah, I always have the chance to like open up my bishop with some e4 break. Or if white has to leave the bishop on e4, then it's always kind of vulnerable there. Well, actually, this was the my idea behind this move was actually to get white to defend the pawn simply, but it's actually not so easy to do so, because if a5, then I can just go b6 and actually just trade it off, because a6 b5, and then white would have to be I think just worried about losing the pawn. And in the game after bishop c2, I end up just launching e4, which was not that hard to do, actually. I mean, because I give up a very nice central pawn for white's a-pawn, which feels kind of wrong, but at the same time I open up the bishop, and I get this like outside passer. Actually, I just felt like black is maybe even just like no longer worse. Like, maybe I could even play for an advantage in some cases. So yeah, here white goes queen e2, and yeah, honestly, I wasn't even sure what exactly I'm playing for here because I felt like I'm not worse. I might even be better. But after coming off the last game, I definitely didn't want to like take a huge ton of risk and end up blowing it. But anyway, I managed, I think, to just kind of play reasonably. I go queen e8. So pinning this one and also kind of turning bishop to b5. And any endgame like this, I evaluated like had to be at least fine for black, maybe better, because we have this d pawn we can attack, and our rooks are active on the queen side, and we have a nice passed b pawn. So he goes rook fe1, which I thought was critical, and then bishop b5, queen d1. Here I played bishop a4. So here I essentially kind of offer a draw by repetition. I actually kind of thought he might take it. I don't know. I didn't feel like white really could be better here. So it's kind of expecting queen e2, and then we just kind of repeat. Because again, if the bishop d3, I think this endgame is always just kind of lackluster for white. Black just seems to be just immediately very active and stuff. But he goes bishop c2, which, okay, is basically, yeah, the only way to continue the game. Bishop takes. And now I was expecting queen takes, and I think my move was going to be queen b5. And I really wasn't sure what he has in mind for this position, because it actually starts to look kind of awkward for white. I'm threatening to take the pawn. If queen c4, I'm happy to go for the endgame again, and then I get the b pawn, rook c8 or something. So yeah, things start to kind of look good. He ends up taking with the rook, actually. And then I still thought queen b5 is decent here, but I ended up playing queen a4 just because it felt a little bit better. Just kind of putting pressure on the rook, x-raying so that I'm always kind of keeping an eye on the queen, also covering the a file. So I don't know, looked like I'm doing all right. He goes h3, rook fe8, just improving the rook, and now rook e6. So this one definitely took me by surprise. I have to say I didn't quite expect it. But it's very sharp. It's also very ambitious, because when black takes here, white gets this e pawn, and that pawn could be kind of picked up and lost. But he clearly believed in the activity of his pieces, which I thought was quite interesting. Like for me, I didn't realize this move was really could played. So I spent some time here and ended up taking this one. I had to make sure rook c8 check wasn't a problem, because I was worried about some tactics like this. Now I think I could just go for the endgame with two rooks against the queen, but wasn't totally sure about something like this, because white's king is definitely safer than my own, and the queen certainly has some targets here, and some pieces and some g4. So I definitely wasn't 100% sure about something like this. But the nice thing is that black doesn't have to take the rook. I can just go rook e8, and everything is defended. White can win the rook back, but then we just get some endgame like this, and I think black is totally fine. So rook takes e6, he just takes back, and now I played rook e8. I was trying to pick up the pawn, queen b1, and yeah, I definitely felt like I'm objectively doing well, but I still have to be careful because my king is a little bit loose, and I don't want to just let his pieces in for free potentially. So if rook e6, then of course he has check first, and then maybe queen takes b7. So queen e4, I thought this was kind of a nice centralization, just defending this one and keeping an eye on the e pawn. Queen b3, and yeah, now I definitely could take this one on e6. I'm trying to remember. Yeah, I thought this was fine. I thought on queen takes e6, he's going to take on b7. I thought it's like close to equal, but I actually felt like this is kind of an improvement for white compared to this position, because his e pawn, could be a liability still. So I spent some time here This is move 31, so we don't have like a ton of time. But I ended up going knight d4. I just felt like my knight has nothing to do, and I decided to trade it off, and maybe I can actually have some counterplay against white's king with the bishop coming to d4. Just kind of simplify the position. So he takes, bishop takes d4, and at this point I was expecting bishop h6. So I just felt like this looks like a dangerous move, and white covers f2. Then I think I was going to finally take this one. Queen takes b7, and yeah, I basically felt like this position is totally fine for black. Like something like queen f7, I keep an eye on this one. He always has to watch out for like counterplay, so he can't just do whatever here. Yeah, like rook c7, of course, is like queen takes f2, and white gets mated. So this seemed totally fine to me, but he instead played e7 check, which at first I was gonna play d5 here. Then I guess I felt like, okay, he's gonna take on b7, rook takes here. I thought black is fine, but maybe I can make a more comfortable draw with king g7. Just threatening to take on e7 with the rook. Because, okay, now white also has to be kind of precise. Like, if he doesn't do something here, I'm just going to be 2 pawns up. Or 1 pawn up, but two pawns on the queen side. So he goes rook c4. And I have to be honest, at this point, I actually did not see this move coming before it happened. And at first I thought I like totally blew it here, because he just has this very simple threat of rook takes d4 and bishop c3. Just like game over. And I just thought like, oh my god, what have I done? Then I calmed down. I realized I have some options here, like queen e6 and queen d5. But it was very scary because queen d5, white has queen a4, getting out of the pin, hitting this one, and hitting the rook on e8. But in that position, thankfully, we have bishop takes f2 check to get out, and the bishop on d2 is hanging. So that one was kind of a lucky break. So had white played here, then we have this, and if white takes the bishop, we're taking this one with check. If they don't take the bishop, just rook takes e7, right? And then black is doing great. So yeah, I think queen e6 was also possible, but then after queen a4, I would have to find b5 and takes queen e2, which is kind of just an insane computer trick that, yeah, during the game, I don't know. I don't think I would have found that. Question, after queen takes b7, so the rook on c2, hanging, wait, in which position? Rook c4, queen d5. Yeah, so basically I'm kind of lucky that I have this. But black is kind of in time here, e7 pawn still hanging, and I'm basically just like one move away from totally consolidating here. So he ends up going bishop c3 because he doesn't really have any immediate tactics. And here basically the game just simplifies. So takes, queen e5, and white has to go for the endgame, otherwise we're just picking up the pawn. So takes, rook c7, b5, rook b7, king f6, takes, and yeah, here he offered a draw, which was quickly accepted. The only thing I was really worried about in this endgame was some position like this, where I really wanted to make sure. I thought this b5 move was actually kind of important. I mean, I'm sure it isn't, but for me it felt important because he's forced to take the pawn with the rook, and then I can take. We just have like a super safe rook endgame, 3 versus 3. Whereas had we played like king f6 here, and he takes, and I take like this, and then we get this king and pawn endgame. Here, like, I don't know, I lost some king and pawn endgame recently. I feel worried, like, I've got this isolated pawn. I'm pretty sure it's drawn and that black is fine, but I didn't even want to to risk it here. So I felt like my b5 was very precise, forcing the rook endgame, not the pawn endgame. And then right on the dot, move 40, we agreed to a draw. So that was it.